Three countries are currently pouring out millions of dollars trying to get facilities ready for the 2025 Africa Nations Championship and also the 2027 Africa Cup of Nations as well. I'm talking about the countries of East African nations of Uganda, Kenya, and also Tanzania. And CAF President Dr. Patrice Motsepe on Sunday visited some of the venues proposed to host the CAF Africa Cup of Nations in 2027 in Nairobi, Kenya. And CAF President Motsepe was joined by Kenya Minister of Sport Kipchumba Murkomen and President of Kenyan Federation Mwendwa, and they visited the Kasarani Stadium, the Nyayo Stadium, and the proposed 60,000 capacity Talanta Stadium. Motsepe seemed impressed with the renovation works going on so far at some of the venues and promised to give them all the support and push needed for everyone to enjoy the Africa Cup of Nations in just a few years away in East Africa. And the President of Kenya, William Ruto, was also speaking about the possibility of Kenya hosting well ahead of the 2027 Africa Cup of Nations.
By allowing us to host AFCON, you have actually given us a brand new stadium without knowing, because we are now in the process of building Talanta Stadium, which is going to be a 60-seater stadium. We've been struggling what to do with that piece of land until you gave us the opportunity to host, and we found something to do with it. So we will now have a brand new stadium. We're trying to see how we can create the ecosystem around it, around roads and everything else. So you have helped us create jobs, you have helped us create many other things, and that is why this thing is immensely important.
Well, joining us now all the way from Nairobi is sports broadcaster with the KBC, Daniel Murkomen. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Daniel. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Let's talk about, the inspection tour, and also don't forget that these three nations, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, will also be hosting the 2025 Africa Nations Championship. Daniel, can we be rest assured that come 2025, which is just next year, these three countries will host the Africa Nations Championships? And can we be rest assured that in 2027, we will all be singing in Swahili in East Africa when the 2027 Africa Cup of Nations comes around?
Well, you've got to learn your Swahili. And very good evening to you. Habari ya jioni nyote. That's what you've got to learn to say right now. Thank you for having me. First of all, let me say this. Looking at Kenya and as compared to Tanzania and Uganda, it's very interesting that you've got to pick this. For the Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers, only Kenya is not playing their home matches in Nairobi or any of their cities that they would. Uganda, they refurbished the Nelson Mandela Stadium in Kampala. Tanzania, they've got the Benjamin Mkapa Stadium. It's already working, and so that means that they are tip-top for that. So those two nations are there. Kenya has got the option of two stadiums, the Kasarani Stadium and the Nyayo National Stadium. So it is the works that has got to be done to make sure that they meet what would be considered an overall Category B stadium as far as the classification is concerned. A Category B stadium can host a Championship of African Nations final, or ideally it should be able to hold a CAF Champions League final. Tanzania have already done that when Yanga played in the final of the CAF Confederation Cup. So the standards are there and they are met. So the biggest challenge now is Talanta Sports City to be finished next year, 2025. But for Nyayo and Kasarani, the works must be done by the end of December, by November or mid-December this year. And that is the biggest challenge for those who are doing the work, because they've got to work day and night. Luckily enough, the cold weather is done here. The only fear they may have is, should the short train season, as we call it, around October come, could that deter the works? But the biggest challenge for Kenya now is to make sure that at least the Nyayo National Stadium is ready to host the group phase matches of the Championship of African Nations. Make sure the dressing rooms are right, the lighting is right, and the pitch.
So Daniel, that for me is really the problem. Can Kenya be ready? It seems as if Uganda is ready, Tanzania is somewhat ready. And you recall, Kenya did have the hosting rights for the Africa Cup of Nations. I think that was in year 2000. The fact that they couldn't make it up. I beg 1996. I beg your pardon.
96.
1996, and the fact that they couldn't host it and the host rights was withdrawn from them, there's precedence to it. But can Kenya be ready in time? That's the big question.
Well, this time around, it's the one thing that Kenya wants to do is to avoid any embarrassment. Remember, 1996, it was the politics. So in 1990, around 94, local politics just messed up the whole setup. The story then was different. So come Chan, and this is the second time that Kenya, actually the third time Kenya is supposed to host Chan. The first time, there was some, internal politics here and there. It went to South Africa. Then when Kenya was given the rights, they had everything else ready except the stadiums. And so in late 2017, Kenya lost the hosting rights. That went to Morocco. So this time around, they really would not want to avoid that. The stadium that is easier to work with and get ready is the Nyayo National Stadium. Kasarani needs a lot of work. They asked that the roof be changed. This is in preparation for the Africa Cup of Nations. But you can't have a stadium that is still a construction site. So the Nyayo National Stadium would be the easier one to work with in the months of September, October, and November to get the pitch right and other facilities right. For Kasarani, if they get the exemption for the roof because it's a heavy engineering feat, bringing it down from a height of about 60 meters, and it's a structure that's been there for, I would say now close to 40 years. We'll be talking about 37 years from 1987. Yeah, 38 years now up there. It's the biggest challenge. But the biggest challenge is get the Nyayo National Stadium ready. And then Kenya can do the group phases of the CHAN, and that would be the biggest test. As everyone says, if you do a CHAN, then that's a test run for an AFCON. It's the best test run you can ever get.
Okay. We'll be speaking with Daniel Warahome, sports broadcaster with KBC. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Game On. We're keeping our fingers crossed because personally, I would like to come for safari and watch football at the Africa Cup of Nations. So it's left to you guys to make sure that we can come. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, Daniel. It's an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much. And by the way,